Okay, so today you're going to begin your closed notes as we begin to discuss and talk about the American Revolutionary War and as we begin to talk about the causes of the war and the road to revolution. So you make sure that you have a writing utensil, your headphones, and a copy of your closed notes number 1. You might be able to get to close notes number 2, but our goal today is to get past and through at least close notes number 1. So let us begin. The standards that we're going to work on today are going to be SS8H3, A and B. Analyze the role of Georgia in the American Revolutionary Era. We know that Georgia did not play a huge part in the Revolutionary War. However, we were a part of the 13 colonies. Therefore, we did have a say in what was going on. A. Explain the causes of the American Revolution as they impacted Georgia. Include the French and Indian War, Proclamation of 1763, and the Stamp Act. B. Interpret the 3 parts of the Declaration of Independence, including the preamble, the grievances, and the declaration, and identify the 3 Georgia signers of the document. Our main focus to get through today is going to be A. Previously, you have watched videos that talked about the Boston Tea Party and why that was important. Although that is not a part of Georgia history, it is important that we know. We've already discussed some primary documents as it relates to why England and why the colonies were so upset. So now it's time to delve into the actual causes of the American Revolution and how those causes impacted the state of Georgia. Causes of the American Revolution as we go to the road to revolution. Competition. Find competition on your notes and write down as we go along. Great Britain, France, and Spain have been competing for land in North America for centuries. If you'll remember, we talked about Hernando de Soto and we talked about the Charter of 1732, as so many people came from Europe, came from Great Britain and France and Spain and settled in North America. By the mid-1700s, France had become Great Britain's biggest rival. In 1756, fighting broke out between the 2 countries over fur trading territory in the Ohio Valley. I'm going to give you a few minutes. Make sure you've written all the notes on this page. So Great Britain, France, and Spain are now competing with one another for trade. And France had become a big rival to Great Britain, and now they were fighting. The French and Indian War. This war was known as the French and Indian War in America because the local American Indians joined forces with the French troops. They were worried that the British settlers would take over their land. In Europe, the war was called the 7 Years' War. So as the French and Indian War begins, it is important to note that France and England were fighting this war against the Indians. However, the Indians had some local people who were willing to help them. It was not just the Indians, it was the Indians and their allies, or the Indians and their friends. So the American Indians joined forces with the French troops to help them out because some of them had become friendly. Feel free to pause this video if you need to. If you look at this political cartoon or this primary source document, you'll note the fighting between the Indians and you'll note the fighting that is occurring between them and Great Britain. Notice what they're wearing. Notice the differences in the weapons that they have. Notice that some you see weapons like guns lying on the ground. You see spears. You see all kinds of things. Remember, the French and the Native Americans are working together against Great Britain. If you remember in my group, I told you that I wasn't going to tell you right then who won the war, the French and Indian War, but Great Britain won the war against the Native Americans and the French because Great Britain were the people who had the most advanced weapons, and most people were too afraid to go against Great Britain and England because, after all, the King of England was the person who officially and originally gave James Oglethorpe the charter to start one of the colonies, which was Georgia. After Great Britain won the war, they came upon what is called a peace treaty. It was called the Treaty of Paris, given in 1763. And according to the Treaty of Paris, because France lost, they were forced to give up all of its North American colonies, including Canada and all the land between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River. Even though the British won the war, the economic cost of the war was incredible and left the country virtually bankrupt. They spent a lot of money on the French and Indian War. So in the end, it was almost like nobody won. Although France was forced to give up its North American colonies, the war cost so much money that Britain was virtually bankrupt. Now look at this map. This map shows what the British had before 1763. All of this land in red, all of this, and all of this land was what the British already owned. After the war and the Treaty of 1763, all of this land in pink, they gained all of this land in pink. Originally, they only had this land and this land. They gained all of this land in pink. The Spanish before 1762 had this land. They gained all of this land. And they lost this little parcel of land down here. Now, some of this land was just reserved for Indians. And this land up here had not been explored by any of the European explorers as of yet. The Treaty of Paris of 1763 also gave Spanish Florida to England. So if you look at the map, the Spanish part down here of Florida, that part right there, was given to England. Georgians were happy with the decision because there would be no more Spanish threat to the colony. If you remember, Georgia was still a buffer colony, keeping France from Spain. Well, Georgia was kind of tired of handling that blunt and kind of tired of the Spanish trying to come across them to fight or to fight at all. So they were happy that there would be no more Spanish threat to the colony. Georgia's borders were also expanded to the St. Mary's River to the south, the Mississippi River to the west, and land around Augusta to the north. This is a picture of what Georgia's boundaries were after 1763, after the French and Indian War and the Treaty of Paris. So, in 1763, there also came a proclamation. It is called the Proclamation of 1763. So, in 1763, King George issued a statement that said no colonists can move west of the Appalachian Mountains. Now, he said if you are upset, you can feel free to move, but you cannot move west of the Appalachian Mountains. So colonists who lived there, if they lived west of the Appalachian Mountains, they had to pack up all their things and move back. And they were not happy about that. Much of the land was given to American Indians to avoid uprisings and violence with the settlers. The intent was to stabilize relations between Great Britain and the American Indian tribes who lived in the area. They didn't want the American Indians who were fighting with France, who lost, to uprise against Great Britain. Great Britain was already almost at the brink of bankruptcy. They could not afford another war. So because of that, they decided that they was going to give some land to the Indians to appease them. Because the British were nearly bankrupt from the 7 Years' War, they could not afford to fight another costly war with American Indians over territory. So according to the Proclamation of 1763, here were the boundaries. These were the 13 colonies at the time and how they were set up. And according to England, the Indians can have all of this. You cannot move any further than right than this Georgia border. And back then, this was the Georgia border. And they said you cannot move past it. So if you had moved over here, or if you had moved over here, you have to come back and move back, according to the Proclamation of 1763. In addition to making peace with the American Indians, the proclamation had two other goals. They wanted to make peace. They didn't want any more fighting because they couldn't afford another fight. But King George III wanted to build a trade relationship with American Indians in order to capitalize on the fur trade business. So he wanted to make some money. Remember, philanthropy, economics, defense. Also, Great Britain planned to build forts along the proclamation line in order to better defend and maintain its colonies. So they still have defense on their mind. They still have economics on their mind. Now, I don't know if philanthropy has gone out the window as of right now, but they still have a plan. So they had three goals for the proclamation of 1763. Make peace with the Indians, build a trade relationship with the Indians, and build forts along their proclamation line so that they could defend their colonies against the Indians. The colonists, many of whom participated in the war in hopes of gaining new land, were extremely upset by the proclamation of 1763. In a way, this was one of the ways to punish them for going to war with Great Britain by saying you can't move any further than here. And if you have already moved, come on back. That was a way to punish them. So they weren't happy. They started the war, the Indians and the French, in hopes of gaining land and gaining more land in North America, and ended up losing it. So they were upset that they had to come back. Many of the frontiersmen simply ignored the treaty and moved west into areas that are now Kentucky and Tennessee. They basically said, you can't tell me what to do. This is a picture of the Appalachian Mountain. Despite the king's orders, a lot of frontiersmen moved into the Appalachian Mountain regions, even though he said don't do it. They were actually going against the king on purpose. People in Georgia did not share the same reactions to the proclamation of 1763 as other colonists. The colony was small, and most colonists were still settled along Georgia's coastline, so they didn't care because they weren't on that side. Georgia gained land and resources from the Spanish after the French and Indian War, and this new land opened up new coastal areas for Georgians to settle, which was great for trade. So Georgia wasn't that concerned with what was happening because it wasn't really affecting them at the time. So the biggest thing that we've learned from this portion of the closed notes is that French and Indian War was a war between the French and Native Americans and Great Britain. Great Britain won the war essentially and made France give up most of its land, but they were almost economically bankrupt. So even though they won, they also lost. As a punishment of sorts, the king said we're going to have the proclamation of 1763, which basically said you can't move anywhere west of the Appalachian Mountains. Well, some people didn't listen and they decided that they were going to go against the king and move there anyway. Georgia didn't care because they were small and didn't live that way. Next week, we're going to get more into this and we're going to learn some more causes of this great war.